members who hated Johnson. These investigations went away after JFK was killed. On November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy was shot and killed while riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. Johnson was then sworn in as president later that day aboard Air Force One. It has always been assumed, and at least one member of the Warren Commission believed, that LBJ was behind the hit because he hated Kennedy and because of the investigations into his criminal activities.
Welcome back, Warriors. It's me, Linda B. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. The JFK files have finally been released. They were released yesterday. I wanted to wait a little bit on this one, but we're going to jump right in. This coincides with a video I did just about exactly a year ago on LBJ and the Kennedy connection. I'll link that video at the end of this one. This corroborates everything in that video. Before we get into it, don't forget to smash like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit all notifications so that you never miss a video that I post. Watch it to the end. This is historical interest of the greatest magnitude. Here I am going to borrow a little bit from fellow YouTuber Benny Johnson while he is interviewing Roger Stone. So let's get into it.
The Kennedy question is a complicated one because it involves, I hate this word, a conspiracy that included the Central Intelligence Agency, Big Texas Oil, the mafia, but the linchpin in it, the common factor is Lyndon Baines Johnson. He's the man with the greatest motive because he's under investigation in the Bobby Baker investigation and the Billy Sol Estes investigation, two enormous scandals of the 1960s. It's interesting that Robert Caro has a multi-volume Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of LBJ, yet he never mentions Billy Sol Estes. That's because Sol Estes has been very open after getting out of prison that he sat in meetings in which the murder of John F. Kennedy was discussed. So you have to look at each element of this for motive, means, and opportunity. Johnson's motive is very clear. That is why a man named Malcolm Wallace, in the employ of Lyndon Johnson's, fingerprints are found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. And at least 6 witnesses tell either the FBI or the Dallas police that they see a man in the window of the 6th floor who meets the physical description of Wallace, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Middle-aged, heavy-set, balding with spectacles. Recently, I think it was Alex Jones, released an audio, which was a conversation between Johnson crony Billy Sol Estes and Cliff Carter, who was the executive director of the DNC under LBJ, LBJ's right-hand man political operative, openly discussing the fact that Malcolm Wallace had been hired by Johnson to kill Kennedy. Then you have the involvement of the Central Intelligence Agency. They're upset about Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs, which is a fiasco, to say the least. They're also upset about his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis because, as we learned 40 years later, when documents were declassified, Bobby and Jack did not face down Khrushchev. That's a media-created myth. They made a secret deal to remove our missiles from Turkey and Italy, changing the balance of power in Europe. And the Central Intelligence Agency believes that Kennedy bungled both the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then you have the mob. They were double-crossed. Ambassador Joe Kennedy essentially made a deal with the mafia to deliver both money, $1 million in 1959, it's a huge amount of money, but also votes, arm twisting for JFK in Illinois and in Texas, giving the election in a razor-thin margin to Jack Kennedy over Vice President Nixon. So everybody here has their own motives, but Johnson's motive is most acute. What we're waiting for now, and I asked this question rhetorically, why would CIA Director Mike Pompeo urge President Trump in 2017 not to release all of these documents? it's pretty clear that the interest that he is protecting is the Central Intelligence Agency. So what I expect now from this new tranche of documents is further evidence of the agency's involvement in the murder of Kennedy. Johnson's involvement is essentially already proven between the fingerprints and this new audio. Organized crime's involvement is proven by the jail buggings of Sam Giancana, both before and after the Kennedy assassination, which he brags about the fact that it's coming, and he brags about the involvement of the mob after it happens. So we're just waiting for one more piece to fall into place, and that's the Central Intelligence Agency. There are other players. Kennedy wanted a silverback dollar. The banks were bitterly opposed to him. The Secret Service clearly violates their own manual and their own rules, and they stand down on November 22nd, 1963. And then you have the whole question of the route of the motorcade. If JFK is going from one point outside of Dallas to another point outside of Dallas, why does he need to come through Dealey Plaza rather than taking the freeway? That's because that is the motorcade route that Governor John Connally, protege of Lyndon Johnson, former administrative assistant to Lyndon Johnson in the Senate, that is the motorcade route that Governor Connally insisted upon.
So you have to be very powerful to do this. You to change, who has the power to change?
This is huge. Now, there's a lot of other things that are going to be said here, but I'm not going to go over the entire interview. I'll leave the link in the description and you guys can check it out when you have time. But I did a video that I'm going to link at the end of this one just over a year ago with LBJ and the Kennedy connection. And some of you have already seen that video, and it is very clear. And I was watching a documentary. I'm a history buff. I was looking at a documentary years ago with LBJ being sworn in on Air Force One right after the assassination of JFK. And I looked at him, and it was like a sinking feeling. It was truly a sinking feeling that I got. And then that feeling was confirmed with that video I did just over a year ago through Forgotten History. Excellent channel. Check it out. But it's weird to me now that this is coming upon the heels of President Donald J. Trump being reelected, and he's the one behind pushing all of these files out. We've got JFK, RFK, and MLK files. The other two are going to be released, and I think there's more on the JFK files to be released as well. But this makes people wonder. This should make everybody wonder. Was that attempt in Butler on Donald Trump's life, was that also government related? You have to ask yourself these things. I mean, because I told a relative, I've said, Jim Crow Joe, I don't know, this looks like a government thing. It looks like knowing history and history repeating itself constantly. It always does. And so there were things that came out about Thomas Matthew Crooks connected to the FBI and things like that. This was LBJ, had a very unique interest in being the president. So interesting. And that Warren report, which was conducted by LBJ, was a total hoax. It was concocted. President Richard Nixon was very good friends with Roger Stone here. And later in this interview, Roger Stone, back then, decades ago, asked Richard Nixon, saying, who was really behind what happened to Kennedy? And Nixon said, well, LBJ and I both wanted to be president. Nixon said, but I was not willing to murder for it. That's what he said. I wasn't willing to do that. And you got to know that anytime you see the other governmental powers going after someone, like the smear campaign, the indictments, or in this case, changing routes. Connally, the Governor Connally, who was a mentee to LBJ, who was connected to him, was the one that told JFK to go this route. And also, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the one behind the top coming down. Because remember, that was like a convertible with high-rise buildings all around. And you can see the Secret Service at the time really did stand down, just as Roger Stone had indicated. So you have all these pieces of the puzzle coming together to get rid of a man. And remember, The evil powers that be in the government don't like it when you don't go along with their agenda. Donald Trump is not going along with the globalist agenda. It's not really about Democrat versus Republican. It is about nationalism versus globalism. President Trump is a nationalist. He is for America. He's always trying to make sure we don't get cheated out of deals and tariffs and things like that, trying to make sure we get money back that we should have been paid. He's all about America. The globalists, they're about this global agenda, which is directly tied to communism and government control. And see, Donald Trump is not about that, and that's why they don't like him. Okay, they did not like Kennedy because of the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was not going along with things either. Now, LBJ had a greatest benefit. He was the VP at the time, the vice president. So he gets sworn in, and he also disliked RFK Sr. because he was the Attorney General of the United States at the time doing an investigation into LBJ. So he wanted to get rid of both of them, which he unfortunately was able to do. Now the truth comes out just over 60 years later. And now, and I knew this already. I knew, and I'm not bragging, I'm really not, because I'm into history. I was like, what, they're really not telling me a whole lot that I didn't know. For those of you who know that anytime a president is gone after, they try to make it look like a lone wolf. But Lee Harvey Oswald, the gunman, which I believe there's more than one gunman, had connections to the CIA. Thomas Matthew Crooks, connections to the FBI. And Thomas Matthew Crooks, just as a reminder, a friendly reminder, was the shooter in Butler, Pennsylvania last year. Okay. And where, they tried to get rid of Donald Trump permanently. But in any event, it's usually government related and orchestrated. We see that. You also have Roger Stone here is going to have another book coming out about the attempted Ronald Reagan assassination. And Hinckley, if I'm not mistaken, is still alive in prison the last time I checked, but it's been about a year or so the last time I checked. So this is very interesting and blows the lid off of everything that the current evil powers that be today in 2025 want to do to our current president. They failed every time. And Ryan Ralph, the one that tried to, get rid of Donald Trump at the West Palm Beach golf course, at President Trump's golf course, has ties as well. Okay. How was he able to get his hands on that type of a weapon? How was he able to do that? Okay, he has ties, and Roger Stone is going to talk about that further, but I'm going to leave the link here. But I want to go back just a little bit and let you see the clip from Forgotten History. Not all of it. I'm going to leave these in the description box below. Watch.
Members who hated Johnson. These investigations went away after JFK was killed. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was shot and killed while riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. Johnson was then sworn in as president later that day aboard Air Force One. It has always been assumed, and at least one member of the Warren Commission believed, that LBJ was behind the hit because he hated Kennedy and because of the investigations into his criminal activities. Defeating Republican candidate Barry Goldwater by more than 15 million votes in the 1964 presidential election, Johnson introduced a slate of new reforms that he said would build a great society for all Americans. Johnson was looking to run for re-election, and he needed to have secure black votes not yet convinced by his getting the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed through the House of Representatives, approved with bipartisan support by a vote of 290 to 130. All Republicans and only a few Democrats voted for the bill. This was later revised in 1968 to aid Native Americans. But the bill had to pass the Senate, and Johnson needed Republican support because his fellow Democrats were not on board. The bill then moved to the U.S. Senate, where Southern and border state Democrats staged a 75-day filibuster against it. This was one of the longest filibusters in U.S. history, and Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, a former Ku Klux Klan member, spoke for over 14 consecutive hours, arguing against civil rights for blacks. The Republican majority passed it in the Senate. The race riots in 1966 and deaths of JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King Jr. prompted the action. However, insiders who knew him stated that Johnson's reasons for getting the law passed was to restrict access to guns by minorities, mostly blacks, due to the riots by creating more regulations and stringent purchasing and registration requirements. In later years, more investigations continued. On August 9, 1984, Estes' lawyer, Douglas Caddy, wrote to Stephen S. Trott at the U.S. Department of Justice. In his letter to Trott, he stated, Mr. Estes is willing to testify that LBJ ordered these killings and that he transmitted his orders through Cliff Carter to Mac Wallace, who executed the murders. Mr. Estes was a member of a 4-member group headed by Lyndon Johnson, which committed criminal acts in Texas in the 1960s. The other two, besides Mr. Estes and LBJ, were Cliff Carter and Mac Wallace.
So this man is willing to give his information about the unalivings of Henry Marshall, George Krutelek, Ike Rogers, and his secretary, Harold Orr Coleman Wade, sister of LBJ, Josepha Johnson, John Kaiser, and the former president, JFK. This man was willing to come out and say, oh yeah, Johnson, Estes, I believe his last name is, had to do with all of these. And people, LBJ orchestrated the whole thing, the whole hit. It was his idea to go to Dallas, Texas for the parade. It was his idea to uncover the limousine, making it like a convertible so that they would have easier access to take out JFK. All of this was orchestrated. Yeah, so whenever there's a president that they're trying to get rid of, we already just need to have it in our minds that this is a governmental thing, because it happens the same way every single time. And most of the presidents, well, the ones in recent years, I'll just say it like that. I haven't done my investigation of, I think there were other presidents that were targeted, but the ones that I only remember are Abraham Lincoln, JFK, Lincoln, and of course, the current president right now. The last two were failed attempts. And with Reagan, they really tried to get him, but he miraculously survived. And God took care of Donald Trump, so it did not happen to him. So we got to understand that just because they come out with reports saying this is what happened, that doesn't mean that is what happened. We know that with the Warren report, which was LBJ's thing to make it look like he didn't have anything to do with it, but it was a hoax. In this interview with Benny Johnson, Roger Stone said the Warren report was just a hoax. And remember, Richard Nixon told Roger Stone years and years and years ago that he and LBJ wanted to be president, but he wasn't willing to take someone's life for it. He wasn't willing to do that. And I want to tell you something about Richard Nixon. The whole thing with Watergate, they didn't like Richard Nixon, so they had to get rid of him. So you have, physical unalivings and you have political unalivings. They had to get rid of him. But I guess it was just too soon after what happened with JFK for them to do the same thing they did to JFK. And you knew that Lee Harvey Oswald, that thing was just not a lone gunman when he was taken out. And then that person who got rid of him was Jack Ruby. And then Jack Ruby was taken out. Oh, it's just a whole big mess. But the files are out. And guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to smash like, comment, share, subscribe, hit all notifications so that you are sure never to miss a video that I post. I am also, I have another show, the Linda B Show, also right here on YouTube as well. We talk culture, relationships, and religion. You all be blessed. Love God, your families, these United States of America, and march on, warriors.